Hello, I am McKendrick, and he is Trey.
And this is the Cold Blooded Caffeine Podcast. In episode 2, we're going to be talking about, is there such a thing as bad coffee?
And I think, of course, we've talked a lot about this in our travels with people that we meet, and it was something that we felt like maybe we should just have a conversation, document it, put it in a podcast, and let you know what we think when we pose that question to ourselves.
Yeah, because I think there's a lot of different ways you can take that question. And so we'll try and hit on all of the different topics, because I think that they may not be what you might expect coming from a coffee roaster, because there's a lot of different ways you can take it, right? Of course, there are brands that
Right.
some people categorize as
Good,
quote,
good versus bad.
Yeah, individual brands. And then there's also like the question that we get a lot is, does coffee expire? So we'll talk about bad coffee in terms of expiration or freshness.
And we can talk a little bit about quality as well. So a lot of what we do is specialty,
right,
which is more about how it's graded.
Yeah.
Right. And in that case, some people look at that to say good coffee is scored at a certain level.
Right. Good point. Yeah. So where do we want to start?
It's a great question. So is there such thing as bad coffee?
Why don't we start with the traditional idea of brands? So I think we the logical place to start is on the lower ends from a pricing standpoint, coffee.
Okay.
Right? So let's take some of our commodity grade coffee. And for those that are kind of just tuning in and getting the taste of the coffee world, when I use commodity grade coffee, that's coffee is a commodity. It's traded on the U.S. stock exchange as well as many other stock exchanges. It has a base price that is set by the stock market. And so when I say commodity grade coffee, that is base grade coffee that you get as a price per pound based on the U.S. stock exchange. So just to be aware, when I say commodity coffee, that is your least expensive coffee that you're going to see available on the market. So
Right.
I'm talking about brands like Folgers, Maxwell House, Chock full of Nuts is another one. So keep in mind when we say commodity grade coffee, that's what we're talking about.
Yep. And I think people would be surprised of how many companies and businesses are just using commodity grade coffee.
Yeah. And with that in mind, we'll also use terms like first wave, second wave, and third wave when we're talking about coffee. So first wave, again, it's your large mass producers, Folgers, Maxwell House, things
Right.
Your second wave producers would be your like more higher end. Your slightly more specialty. I use that word
specialty or quality.
But it's a little bit higher grade, and I'm talking like Pete's, Starbucks, things like that. Those are your second wave coffee, and then third wave are really your high end specialty coffee. Like we would categorize, I actually categorize us as somewhere between second and third wave, just because of the way we market our products. It lends us a little bit more towards like in the middle between. And your third wave coffee, you can get you can go down rabbit holes for days.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you can talk about different processing methods, all kinds of different things that would categorize as a third wave shop. So excuse me, as we talk about good and bad coffee and kind of going forward, just understand that commodity grade coffee is synonymous with first wave coffee. And so that's what we're probably going to be talking about when we talk about, quote, bad coffee from a consumer brand standpoint, right?
Right.
So let's take that, for instance, the first wave coffee. The reason why I think a lot of people would categorize that as bad is for two main reasons. One of them is like status symbol. So like it's a cheaper product. You get people that are looking for that status symbol that want that. that price tag associated with it to make it feel like a more valuable product, a better product, a good product versus what you might consider bad.
So even taking a step back, or maybe a slight pivot though, when you're talking about good or bad coffee, another element that you have to discuss is how you as a consumer drink your coffee, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
a lot of times you're adding so many additives to your coffee, the it completely really dissolves or dilutes or um just takes over the original taste of the coffee, that you may not even know what the original coffee tastes like. You probably never tasted. A lot of places you go to, you're ordering the same thing that you've always ordered.
Yep.
Right, with the same amount of sugars and creams or flavors. So if you have never tasted the coffee, just black coffee, then you really may not know how good or bad it really is.
Yeah.
And then when you taste it black, it's almost like a surprise to you.
Yeah. So let's take that for instance. So let's take you've consumed this black coffee
Mm-hmm.
for the first time. Say you're not a black coffee drinker and you consume a cup of black coffee. What are we saying is good or bad about that cup of coffee? Like when we say, is this a good, or counter, is this a bad cup of coffee?
And I think it will change based on people's taste, right?
Sure.
So some people like a coffee that's a little more acidic, right? Some may like it a little more floral. Some may like it a little more bold.
Mhm.
The different hints that you may taste depending on where it originates from.
Yeah.
It may be something that you're looking for. And if it's not there, then you may categorize it as bad.
Yeah.
Or if it has too much of a acidic taste, you may categorize it as bad. But again, a lot of that falls into kind of the roast profiles as well. Like how long you roast, do you like a light, medium, or dark? Like there's a lot of details that get baked into the process.
Yeah.
That if you're not aware of all those details and how they impact the taste of the coffee, then you'll quickly go to something and say it's bad. Well, in reality, it's just different for you.
Sure. Yeah, and I think that's a good point, and I think you hinted a bit at what the final conclusion that we're going to talk about is going to be at the end. So with that in mind, we do have an answer for you here. At least each of us will give you
Right.
our answer on what we think good and bad coffee is at the end of it. But for this sake of conversation, I think in terms of taste, like you said, it's up to the individual that's consuming the coffee to determine whether that specific coffee's taste profile is to their liking or not. Generally speaking, when we're talking about bad coffee, it's either what I found is either people say, "Oh, I don't like this coffee; it's bad," is it's too bitter or it's too acidic. And the odd thing about that is they're opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
when you're talking about what McKendrick hinted at as roast profiles, light, medium, dark is generally what you hear about in like common language to determine what a roast profile is going to be. It gets a lot deeper than that, but for general public knowledge, light, medium, dark is what most people are going to associate with different coffees. Light coffee tends to be more acidic.
Just by
the
general
nature
right.
of what it is.
Right.
There are some light roast coffees that are way more acidic than others.
And it would depend on the source, which it comes from, the
Right.
farm, where it comes
Right.
from, the elevation, which is grown,
Yep.
How it's scored.
Yep.
So those things will all play a part in how acidic the coffee will be once it's roasted.
Right. But then on the converse of that, generally speaking, the darker you roast a coffee, the more bitter it's going to be.
Correct.
The less acidic, the more bitter it will taste. Right. So again, we say that to say that a lot of that comes down to personal preference. And I don't think that you can, with a educated mind, say an acidic or a bitter coffee is bad just based on that one attribute. Right.
Correct.
And some people may disagree with me, and that's okay. But I think that you have to have other factors involved before you say that's just a bad coffee.
Correct. I agree.
Another part about commodity coffee that we talk. So to that point, commodity coffee tends to be more on the bitter side because they're trying to, there's two factors. One, they're trying to overcome a lesser quality coffee by adding more roast flavor to it. So you tend to see those commodity grade coffees to be a medium or darker. Excuse me. So, yeah, so that's one aspect of it, is that they're trying to overcome the quality of the bean, so you get a darker roast, which means you get more bitter flavor as opposed to the acidic flavor. The other side of that is that a lot of the commodity grade coffee, not all of it, but a lot of it is coffee Robusta as opposed to Arabica, which is the most common you see in specialty coffee. Robusta, just by its very nature, tends to be more bitter, but also tends to have more caffeine content in it. So you'll see a lot of like your what you would categorize as like high test coffees, like your high caffeine. Your I'm not going to name brands. We all know what they are, but the ones that are advertising highest caffeine content in the world, those tend to have a large portion, if not all, Robusta. And that's not necessarily bad, but it lends itself to more of a bitter taste overall. So you may categorize commodity grade coffee as, quote, bad because of that bitter taste. And a lot of it has to do with the beans that are used, not necessarily other factors like roast or anything like that.
But the roast time, if they're talking about the amount of caffeine that's in them and how strong it is, then there is an element of how long you're roasting it.
For sure.
Right?
For sure.
To develop that taste.
Yes. So I think that's probably my major takeaway from the brand or the commodity side when we say bad coffee in terms of taste, what that looks like. I think that probably encompasses most of it. It's either too acidic or too bitter.
Right.
And that's kind of the two sides that we see. So another aspect that you can say that this is bad coffee, what do you think, is like defects from origin?
Correct. So now you start talking about how well a coffee farm is maintained or managed, and which then transitions into talking about how they're graded and what constitutes a good farm and how it's graded, and a good score, which people will ask that. Like some people who are avid coffee drinkers, they'll ask like, okay, what's the score of these, beans that, are roasted for my coffee? Now, a lot of places you go, they're not going to know. And a lot of people don't ask, right? But that now gets into another conversation because people will quickly go to if the score of this coffee and if that dictates good or bad taste.
And that means a lot to a specialty coffee roaster like us, because not even so much as the flavor of the coffee itself, but the value for what we're paying for those beans. Because as McKendrick mentioned, coffee's graded on a scale from up to 100.
Up to 100, right?
Yeah. So and your specialty coffee is graded, especially if it's a score of 80 or higher.
Right.
So if you're paying specialty grade prices for a coffee that is 80 or higher, then you want to make sure that you're getting a resulting product that fits that grade, right? So not every bag of coffee is graded, right? It's graded at origin and it's given a score, and then that score sticks with that shipment all the way through.
All the way through the supply chain. Correct.
So that's why it's important for us, especially coffee graders, to sample roast our product. So when we get coffee in, we test it. We roast a smaller batch to make sure that it meets the grade that we expect it to be. And that helps eliminate some of those defects from getting to a consumer that may otherwise, if you're not maintaining strict protocols throughout the supply chain. And so that's why it's important to have good quality control processes. So sample roasting and testing coffee that when it's arriving to you as the roaster, and then also quality samples of product before it goes out the door. So testing, cupping, tasting those coffees before they get out to the consumer to make sure that they're matching your taste profiles as well. Because I mean, some things you just can't see with the naked eye. There's like mold and there's like parasite damage that may not be evident as a visual inspection, that you may just have to taste and make sure that there's no like nothing off about the particular batch. And I mean, we've been pretty lucky. We work with a very reputable importer who does a lot of that work for us, but we also still do that separately on our own to make sure that the product that we're shipping out meets those standards. But that's the big thing, is when you're talking about coffee coming in from origin, from the country that produced it, is making sure that it's mold free, that it's chemical free, which is a big thing, and then also which is parasite free.
And I think the cupping process is a big deal as well, right? Because, you know, we've done a lot of private labels, and the one thing we want to do is make sure that, you know, that our customer is happy.
Yeah.
Right. So we're always, you know, going through the cupping process, make sure we don't skip out on any steps, and also getting the customer themselves to do the tasting to make sure it meets their expectation.
Yeah.
Everyone kind of has an expectation, especially if you're going to have, you know, a private label, your brand on a bag. You want it to have a certain taste. So that cupping process is very important.
It's a calibration, right? It's getting everyone on the same page as to what this coffee's should taste like, what, you know,
or what you want it to taste like.
Yeah. So that's the vital piece. And I think we probably need to do maybe not a podcast, but maybe just a YouTube video or something on our cupping process, because I think it's something interesting that like people outside of people who are not a coffee professional may not realize the amount of coffee that we taste to make sure that that we get a good product out the door. It's a lot of effort behind the scenes to make sure that product going out is as consistent as it's expected to be.
And of course, like the more you got to taste, it's almost like the less sleep you're going to get because of how much caffeine you're consuming throughout the day.
And with cupping, you do cupping as a pure science, you do taste it and then spit. But I'm a big believer of taste it like the customer is going to consume it.
Right, exactly.
And so I also always, every time I make a roast and also a new roast and also to calibrate against existing roasts, I'll always do a Chemex pour or something like that to make sure that I'm testing against what my customers expecting.
Right.
We even have drip brewers in the office so that we can run just through like a mechanical drip brewer, because we know that's a large portion of what our customers use. They don't have high-end commercial equipment or even pour overs and things like that. So we want to make sure that the product that you're getting is something that you would expect consistency over that product's life.
And I just don't like to see waste. Like if you make a cup of coffee, I'm gonna drink a cup of coffee.
It does. It hurts.
Yeah, it's like, oh man, you want to cup it, taste it, spit it out, then bring the next one on. Like, no, I'm likely gonna drink more than half of that cup.
So usually when I cup for flavor profile, so if I'm trying to match something in my head, I will cup a lot of different coffees. Like, so I'll cup 5, 6, 7, 8 coffees all at one time to make sure that I'm trying to hit different targets and different profiles. In those instances, I do spit and not drink all the coffee.
That's a lot of caffeine to consume.
I would be off the wall. I have made that mistake before, trying to work out espresso roasts and pulling a bunch of espresso shots and just taking sips of a bunch of espresso shots, not thinking about
the consequences
what was happening. Yeah, I spent a couple of sleepless nights because of that mistake. But I digress. We got a little bit off topic there, but that's okay. This is the real deal. This is what you're going to get with the podcast, as opposed to some of the more formatted stuff. So we apologize, but we don't. So we'll keep going. And I guess maybe one of the last things that worth mentioning is the brew method itself, since I mentioned the Chemex, that can have an effect and can be considered bad coffee, and not just only brew methods, but ratios as well. So I really want to talk about ratios when we talk about good and bad coffee.
Like
water to coffee ratio. Yeah.
So that's one of the things that's pretty interesting, because I've noticed, and as I would say, relatively new coffee drinker, one of the things that I've always focused on is the right ratio of water to coffee grounds. Like, there has to be consistency. So with the shows that we go to, I'm always thinking about that consistency. So when I'm making coffee at home, I'm looking for the scale. Yeah. Like, how do you make consistent coffee if you don't have the scale to measure out how many coffee grounds you're using to make a pot or a cup, and how much water? Like, you can really dilute, like, to the point that the coffee is what people consider bad or like tea, right? By putting too much water.
Yeah.
So the methods in which you make it can easily, you can go to someone's house. Oh, you got coffee? Let me get a cup. And you taste it, and it's like, oh my gosh, this is terrible.
I think that's the right word, though. It's not bad. It's inconsistent. Right.
Correct.
Right. You can make a great cup of coffee by just eyeballing it, but you can also make a bad cup of coffee by just eyeballing it. Right. And so I think that's the key when we talk about ratios and we talk about measuring is consistency.
Yeah.
So the ratio that we use, if you come see us at a show, the ratio that we use is 1-15 for our pour overs. And we try to come close to that as well when we do the drip coffee as well. Yep. So 1-15 to 1-17 is what I tend to say is
an acceptable
range. And by 1-15, what I mean is 1 part coffee to 15 parts water.
Correct.
So in our instance, it's 350 grams of water, which is our 15.
Right.
To 23 grams of coffee.
Of coffee grounds. Right.
I'll say that again. 23 grams of coffee grounds, 350 grams of water. Please keep them in the same measurement. I hate it online when you look up something and it's like 23 grams and 1,000 milliliters.
Like,
no, please
wait,
just keep them in the same 23 grams, 350 grams. It's easy. It's 1-15. And that way that you can scale it. So whatever size you're doing, all you have to do is measure your water that you're putting in, and you match that. You divide the water by 15, and boom, that's how much coffee you need.
Yep,
it's easy peasy.
Yep.
So that, I think, is one part of the quote recipe to get good coffee in whatever brew method that you're going to use.
Consistency is what you're talking about.
Yes. Yeah. The other aspects is, let's talk about the different brewers that may be categorized as quote bad coffee. And I think the number one that we see are Keurigs. I think that's the one that you hear people say, oh, you can't get good coffee out of a Keurig. and I disagree with that pretty heavily. I think it's challenging to get high grade specialty coffee flavor out of a Keurig, but I don't think it's impossible. I think there's two main challenges to Keurigs. One is what we just talked about. It's darn near impossible to get that ratio right with a Keurig. Right. So you're talking about I'm going to do exactly what I said not to do, and use different measurements. But you're talking about 10 to 12 ounce cups, right?
Yeah.
But you're talking about a pod that has. I mean, I'm spitballing here. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but it's not 1 ounce of coffee in it. You know what I mean?
Right.
So if you're talking about 12 ounces of water, 1 to 12 would be 1 ounce, but there's no way that it's even close to that. Right. So it may be like,
and those pods are different from manufacturer to manufacturer. They're all over the place.
So I think that the important thing with the pods is get good quality pods. And this is a shameless plug for the pods that we use, but they are by far the best pods that we could find. So we do offer pods, and they are from a company called Green Pod. and they're specialty packed. They do include more coffee than your traditional pod by about 40% more
40%, yeah.
Coffee than your traditional plastic pod, and they're 100% compostable.
Yeah.
Shameless plug for the green pods. Even if you don't buy our coffee in the green pods, get green potted coffee.
Yeah,
because it will make your coffee instantly taste better just purely by the amount of coffee that is in the pods.
Now it doesn't change. I mean, if your Keurig, because you're getting 40% more coffee grounds in our pods, right?
Yes.
Which is cool. And it's consistent
Yes.
with our pods.
Yeah.
The amount of coffee grounds is the same. Whereas in some different manufacturers, I've seen a lot of differences in the amount of coffee grounds that are in each pod. So at least you get that level of consistency. And then it's a matter of making sure your Keurig is calibrated
correctly, right? That's a big deal too, because I
Yeah.
was going to mention that the probably the number one thing that I would say drawback to using a machine to make coffee is the water temperature.
Yeah.
That's the problem with these machines. Overwhelmingly, I mean, we'll get into some of the drip brewers and why some of them are better than others, but the number one reason, and if you're going and looking for a new coffee maker, find one that has good reviews on the temperature. Find one that someone has done tests on the water temperature as it goes into the coffee bed, because that is going to make your coffee taste better or worse. Have the most impact on your coffee coming out of a drip brewer
at that point,
at
right?
that point. Yeah.
Outside of anything that happens,
let's not talk about the coffee at that
coffee
point,
or the supply
or
chain, or how it's managed on the farm.
Say you did optimal work up until that point. If you literally came into our roastery and got the freshest bag of coffee and put it in your drip coffee maker, the temperature of the water going through that bed is going to have the most impact of anything up to that point. So keep that in mind. Invest just a hair more. I know there's a range when you're talking about coffee makers.
Yeah,
but
they get to be expensive.
They do get to be expensive, but don't go for the cheapest coffee maker because of the way they work. And I don't want to get too much into it in this podcast, because I mean, we're going down a rabbit hole as it is, but look for one that is rated highly for the consistency of the temperature coming out of the spout and going into the bed.
Right.
So that's the big thing with the drip coffee makers. And then the last thing that I want to mention about the machines is clean your machines. Clean your machines. And I know somebody's going to hear this and say, "Oh, but I like the seasoned coffee."
Oh yeah,
pot.
We've seen plenty of those from working together in the break rooms and sitting on people's desks, and like
you're just lying to yourself and you're being lazy. Is what, like, I don't want to be mean, but there's no benefit to having old coffee stuck to the side of your mug or of your machine. So that will add bitterness and sourness to your coffee. And there's no easy way to say it, but just clean your machines and your mugs.
And we've seen some pretty gross ones. Like,
please.
I don't understand how people don't see that impacts the taste of the coffee.
Let's take the equation completely out of the health factors and bacteria and everything. We're talking about bad tasting coffee. That is an immediate factor that's not controllable. And that's one thing that I want you to take away from this podcast is good coffee is consistent coffee, right? That's the big thing. So it's about eliminating factors of change, right? So you're talking about consistent temperatures, consistent doses, and not introducing
anything foreign
or foul or bitter or sour. So those are the big things for me. I think. Can you think of any more reasons why people would think that coffee is bad? Cold coffee, I think, is one that people just don't get behind. I don't think there's anything. I mean, I think that's a like or dislike thing. I don't think it's
and I'm a
bad.
I'm a dislike. Well, I mean, I say I'm a dislike. So I'm not a fan of starting with hot coffee.
Yes.
And I go
And
do something for 2 hours and
cold.
remember I drink all my coffee and come back.
Yeah.
It just not. That just doesn't like it wasn't made as a cold coffee. I think it's a mental thing, probably. But I don't know. It just doesn't taste well.
I'm not a huge fan of iced coffees and cold brews. I'm getting there. I'm trying to open my palate and expand into it,
right?
Because I do genuinely love coffee, and so I would like to like those types of things, and I'm getting there. But again, I don't think that's a bad or a good. I think that's
just a like or a dislike.
Thing.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, back to the original question,
right?
Is there a such thing as a bad cup of coffee?
You want to go first? You want to give your answer?
Yes, there's bad coffee.
Okay. Tell us why.
Because people don't know how to brew it consistently, and they buy cheap coffee from all over the world, and they contaminate it with sugar and creamer and flavors, and they have no clue what good coffee tastes like.
Okay. I feel you. And I feel a little bit of a little tongue in cheek there.
Yeah, a little bit of tongue in cheek. It is.
But no, I mean, I'll give my answer and let you follow up too, because I think are there ways to make coffee better? Absolutely. I think that's the whole point of the specialty coffee industry is refining tastes and trying to do things better, both from a sustainability standpoint as well as from a flavor standpoint, so that you get the optimum extraction and get the optimum flavor out of a cup of coffee.
Right.
So I said, kind of leading towards yes, there is such a thing as bad coffee, but I'll counter it and say no. The only coffee that I would consider bad is the one that you don't enjoy, right? But that's personal, right? So I wouldn't categorize any coffee as bad other than the defect coffee that doesn't taste like coffee. So if you have a coffee defect, either in the roast process or at the farm origin process, that makes the coffee not taste like it's intended, that's bad coffee.
Okay.
Other than that, I would say coffee is one of those cool things that is just there to make you happy. So however you consume it, however you like it, hot, cold, sugar, cream, milk.
I'm going to say if it's not cold-blooded caffeine coffee, it's
bad.
bad.
Okay.
It's bad.
But no, enjoy coffee, right?
Enjoy,
don't let anyone say that the coffee you drink is bad.
Yeah.
Even if it's a brand that people think that's bad, that's okay. If it makes you happy, that's what coffee's there for.
Yeah.
Whether it's brewed through a Keurig, a Chemex, or somewhere in between, as long as it makes you happy, I don't see any problem with any coffee that's on the market. Now we will say, and this isn't the topic of the podcast, there are coffees that are more sustainably sourced, that are more ethically sourced in terms of labor and compensation for farmers.
Organic, no pesticides. Like,
we're not talking about that in particular in this podcast. We're more focusing on the flavor aspects and the preparation of the coffee. Do your research on who you're doing business with. That's just a general rule.
I think you'll find it interesting though. Like a lot of places, I mean, I've especially now when I'm traveling, like with some of my friends or whatnot, and knowing how involved I am with coffee and the coffee business and everything we got going on, they often ask when we're ordering coffee, do you know the origin for this coffee? And no one can answer behind the counter.
Yeah.
Like no one can answer. Like airports that we've been in, like just stores that we go to, sometimes even coffee shops.
Yeah.
Like, hey, what's the origin of this coffee? And sometimes they can't answer.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate.
That's unfortunate. Yeah.
But I mean, it's kind of goes with the territory, right? People just want they want what they want.
Yeah.
Right. And to your point earlier, you know, jokingly, when I said there is a such thing as bad coffee. I mean, if you like it, who's to judge?
Yeah.
Right. So I don't know.
It's your decision as a consumer, what you spend your money on, what you want to consume. And at the end of the day, coffee is not an essential item.
No.
It's something that you enjoy because of the pleasure of enjoying it or because of the benefits that it gives you.
Right.
And that shouldn't be something that you feel bad about or judged on or whatever. If you want Folgers, if you want Starbucks, if you want Cold Blooded Caffeine, whatever that is,
or whatever, Maxwell House or anybody. I mean,
so
to each his own. I mean, and again, you know, we talked about a lot of different things, but at the end of the day, if you enjoy your cup of coffee, your brand of coffee, you know, the time of day that you drink coffee, whether it's hot or iced or whatever, then who are we to say that what you're drinking is good or bad?
Yeah, that's a personal decision. So the takeaways for this episode, don't let anybody tell you that it's bad coffee. That you drink as much coffee as you can to try out different tastes and try out different things. Don't stick with one roaster. I'm like, I'll say it right now. Cold Blooded Caffeine. I love Cold Blooded Caffeine. I roast it. I love it. I drink other coffee. You know, I don't just drink my coffee,
right?
Because I like to explore and I like to try different things. That's not a bad thing.
I mean, and I would say I'm less adventurous. I mean, my exploration is probably just for comparison reasons.
Yeah.
Like if I'm drinking coffee, it's likely Cold Blooded Caffeine coffee.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah.
Now, when we're, you know, on the road and doing shows or going to, you know, stores, and it's like, this label says this is the best tasting coffee in the world. Oh, I need to taste this, right?
Yeah.
So,
but those are the times good. I mean, it's a good experiment. I mean, it's trying something different. So,
but those are bad.
If it has to say it's the best coffee in the world, I haven't come across one yet that was like, oh, okay,
this is life changing.
But
yeah, no.
More importantly than good versus bad is consistency for me.
Yeah,
I think that's the main thing. Is make sure that you're measuring, make sure that you're cleaning your equipment, and make sure that you're using a ratio to ensure that you get the same cup of coffee every time.
Yep.
Drink what you like, but be consistent with it.
So, all
right.
So there you have it. Is there such thing as good or bad coffee?
I don't know.
We don't know. It's all up to you. So hopefully you enjoy the podcast. Tune in for more episodes that are coming soon.
Yep.
And we'll be back.
Yeah, that's episode 2 of the Cold Blooded Caffeine Podcast. Appreciate it, guys. So after we finished recording the previous episode, I did realize that we missed a topic that I brought up in the introduction about the freshness or staling and expiration of coffee that I wanted to go back and touch on just to make sure that we close the loop on the episode. Expiration of coffee is one of the questions that we get most frequently from our customers. So coffee itself, we don't define it as having an expiration date. It's a shelf-stable item. So I've personally consumed coffee that was 20 years old, and there's no ill effects from consuming the coffee. But there is definitely a decrease in aromatics and in flavor as that coffee ages. So typically speaking, you want to consume the coffee as soon after it's roasted as possible, while still allowing a day or so post roast to allow it to off gas, and that is release the carbon dioxide that's built up as part of the roasting process. But after that one day, you want to consume it as soon after roast as possible to maintain the maximum freshness and the flavor profile that coffee and that roaster desired to be in that coffee. Typically speaking, when we're talking about flavor and freshness, we're talking about a 30 to 45 day window post roast where that coffee is at its peak freshness. And just to note that is assuming that it's whole bean coffee. Ground coffee does stale significantly faster than whole bean coffee because it has more surface area for that staleness to take effect. So in this, we're mostly talking about whole bean coffee. So yeah, 30 to 45 days post roast is your optimal freshness. Now, that doesn't mean to say that you need to throw out all your coffee that's post 30 days. Most consumers that aren't super into coffee or that are casual coffee drinkers aren't going to notice a significant decrease in flavor past 30 days, all the way up to maybe 60 days or so, you're gonna open that coffee and be perfectly happy with it. In fact, most of your grocery store coffee that you get don't hit the shelves until they're about between 20 and 30 days old. So you're not going to find a bag of coffee on a grocery store shelf, most likely, unless it's a high-end specialty grocer that's less than 20 to 30 days old. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed the episode. I don't think that, to recap on that last point, I don't think that freshness has all that much to say about whether the coffee is good or bad. I think there's a lot more significant impacts that can have on whether a coffee is good or bad, but it is something to take into effect. Get the freshest coffee that you can. Look for local roasters that can guarantee fresh coffee if you can, or have it shipped in like we do through the website, where we roast and ship everything the same within a day or two of the order. So I hope you enjoyed the episode. Appreciate you tuning in, and we'll catch you again on the next one.